ABC 24 News starts right now with breaking news.
Thanks for joining us for expanded coverage of breaking news today on this Wednesday here on 24 Plus. And I'm talking about, of course, the very unfortunate and tragic killing of Pastor Ricky Floyd, the pastor of let's start over again, guys. I'm sorry. Look at all the church names here. I'm really looking at the wrong one. Not First Baptist, not Advocacy.
Imagine how we feel.
Option 3.
Pursuit of God. Yeah, right. On Broad.
I'm looking at. Okay. I have no prompter in camera 5, just for the record.
ABC 24 News starts right now with breaking news.
And our breaking news on ABC 24 this afternoon is the unfortunate and tragic killing of Pastor Ricky Floyd of Pursuit of God Church in Fraser. The community stunned by his murder overnight at a bar called Mama's downtown Memphis. And we're going to discuss that today with two people of the cloth who know a thing or two about not only what it's like to serve, of course, but also this gentleman behind us here, who is hard to believe given how young he is, or was, I should say, and the contributions he made to this city. That we're having to talk about the latest victim of gun violence being Pastor Ricky Floyd. Let's start first, if we could, you two, with just reflecting a little bit on what kind of man he was and the contributions you think he made to the city. We'll start with you, Earle Fisher.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I'm sure both Pastor Norman and myself, our condolences go out to Sheila,
correct,
his wife, and to the family of the Pursuit of God Church and to the people of Fraser. We knew him, I knew him as a very eclectic, unorthodox faith leader, and for the legitimate criticisms that are leveled towards the black church for what black pastors don't do in the community, what cannot be said of him is that he did not try to be out in the community and extend his ministry beyond Sunday morning service and the four walls of his church. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, when you get news like this on a day like this, it is earth-shattering in a sense and unsettling, but we definitely want to do what we can to honor his life, his legacy, and his love.
Thank you, Pastor Earle Fisher with Abyssinian Baptist Church, and we also have Keith Norman, who's the pastor of First Baptist Church Broad. Why don't you reflect?
I also echo that heartfelt condolence extended to the family and to the children and to Amira, his granddaughter, whom I had the opportunity to meet. He loved her. He would take her with him from place to place when he would go places. But to say that he was an enterprising as well as innovative pastor, he did not allow situations that could be overwhelming in a community and could seem to be far out of reach to go unsolved because of resources. He would look at the problem, and then he began to call in people whom he had access to and meet with them and say, here's a problem that we need to solve. He was a galvanizer of ideas and thoughts, and he never saw a situation that seemed too big. And by the power of God and the collective spirit of really getting people together and leveraging resources, he got the job done.
We have a quote from the church that we want to share with folks at home that was just released upon the news that we've been telling you about today, and that is, his death is more than a loss for his family and his congregation. It is a loss for Memphis. Gun violence in our city has taken too many lives, shattered too many families, and left too many communities in grief. This must stop. We cannot allow senseless violence to define us. We must stand together, neighbors, leaders, law enforcement, and faith communities, to bring meaningful, lasting change. That's from the Pursuit of God Church about losing their pastor today. Mm-hmm. Who can't agree with that sentiment? Yet here we are again, gentlemen, and we keep having these conversations of not so prominent people in our community who are falling to gun violence, and there's this plea to stop it. We've got to do something, but we're not making a whole lot of progress. Homicides are down in Memphis year to year, double digits. In fact, I think it's at 12, 13% at this point, but we have a long way to go. Keith?
Mm-hmm. Homicides are down, and while that is true, they're down from an astronomical record high. And so because they're down, it just simply means they're higher than they should be, actually. And so that work has been done, and kudos to those who are making that effort. But let's also look at the reality of it. This is the voice of Pastor Floyd in that statement. These are the words that he shared with us in Club and other areas where he served, and he would also echo that they have captured his spirit in those words right there. It was almost as if he wrote them himself. And then we have to look at the other things that contribute to this. It's not just a local Memphis thing. Right. It is a state issue where we have said guns can be shared by anyone, and we've made it easier to access. And then we look at this gun problem with lack of education about how to handle and store and use a gun. And then let's go even further. Conflict resolution and life management. We've taken it out of schools. And so now people feel as if I have a problem, resort to violence. The easiest thing to do is to grab a gun and then solve the problem. That's not the way. It never has been, and it never should be.
And I think that's part of the tragic irony of this. We are actually mourning the loss of someone who was using his platform, his prestige that he cultivated over the arc of his ministerial and pastoral tenure to try to respond to gun violence and now becoming victimized by it. I think it speaks to how vulnerable all of us are. And I think for far too long, we only seem to look at this when there are high-profile people like Pastor Floyd. But even Pastor Floyd was mindful of the fact that this could happen to any of us, especially as Dr. Norman was stating, when it is easier to get access to guns and drugs than it is to get access to a job that you want or a type of education that you want or some of the health care that you need. Right. These are the structural and systemic issues that we ultimately have to respond to, and we can't continue to just deal with the symptoms without dealing with the system.
We don't know a lot about the circumstances leading to the crime, except that there was an argument at this outside this Mama's bar downtown with a woman, and it escalated, and then there was gunfire. And how often does that exact kind of situation happen? We had another pastor who was killed within the last couple of years in Whitehaven, Reverend Artura Eason Williams. That was more of a random crime situation, a carjacking, a theft that was involved. This was just if you talk to police, the crimes they respond to most often involve some sort of domestic argument of some sort, where things just escalate out of control. And that goes to your point, Reverend Norman, of the need for how to help people de-escalate situations like that where that they might find themselves in.
The tone of our nation, unfortunately, even from the federal level, unfortunately, is antagonistic at this point. We have a leader who chooses to fire at people. We saw this in the White House a few days ago, where there was this argumentative nature. Rather than showing how to de-escalate and bring things down, where people use language and words to solve problems rather than using violence or threats to solve problems. And so that very tone is set from the nation's White House all the way down to where we are right now. Artura was also a colleague and friend of both of ours. We shared time with her in seminary, in instruction, and co-leadership in the pastoral roles. And so we have to look at these things and make sure that we don't normalize them. Right. They are systemic as a part of our society, and they're being woven in, and not just because it's two pastors or another pastor that we speak of at this time, but because it's anyone that we speak of at this particular time. It is more important right now for us to concentrate on the great work that he's done, and not always the circumstances. We're within just a few hours of this happening, and so the details will play out. Right. And so we should not give too much attention to those details at this point so that we drown ourselves in misinformation or speculation, or that we start majoring in the minors, if you will. We should hear this person's contributions to life, his community, his family, his church, and figure out how do we prop those things up, and we continue that work, because if he was fighting to reduce violence and gun violence, we should definitely keep moving in that direction.
We were together several years ago in front of Regional 1 as a group of faith leaders and medical professionals announced that gun violence is a public health crisis. Right. And so I think what we're here to articulate and amplify is the perseverant nature of a pastor who, even though most pastors' tenure is somewhere between, a year and a half to 3 years, he had decades in pastoral leadership in the city of Memphis. And all of us know, if you have served in the pastorate any substantial amount of time, you've had to overcome all manner of obstacles and trials to make any kind of positive impact. And he was able to do that. And we just want to make sure we celebrate and amplify that, to Pastor Norman's point, even as we look at the larger issue of gun violence that has plagued Memphis and Shelby County and the entire nation for far too long.
Not to make it political, but you did mention from the White House on down, and of course we know there's plenty of Democratic leadership on the Senate side and in Congress who are engaging in a lot of inflammatory rhetoric as well. But the importance of words, and that words matter. Reverend Norman alluded to it. Why don't you talk about that a little bit as well?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you are able to use words to incite, then that also means you should be able to use words to de-escalate. But there's not been a lot of promotion of those types of strategies. And when you are thrust into an environment of the type of political toxicity that we've experienced at the federal level, at the state level, and even far too often in the local level when we think about some of the developments in the school board for the last several months. You know, these are all things that contribute to the type of public policies that produce environments where these types of things happen far too often. And so I think what we are trying to argue for is an attention to the structural and the systemic and not just the symptomatic, because words matter no matter who is using them. But they obviously matter more when they are coming from people in positions of power and authority.
Well, as two men of God, you know, words can inspire. They can create very good feelings and goodwill and accomplish incredible things. And it does seem like we've kind of gotten away from that a little bit, and it's become much more inflammatory and on the negative side rather than encouraging positive action.
We use our words every Sunday and in between to bring hope to people. I shared earlier with a colleague of mine that people at Pursuit of God came week after week, Sunday after Sunday, to hear what they believe to be a word and perspective from the Lord given by their pastor, helping them to navigate this crazy environment in which we live, in which every morning we wake up to a new executive order that says this may or may not happen to your life. And that inspires hope, and that inspires people to endure in the space that we're in. It is words that we use. It's the words that we use that help people to sustain and maintain and move in the right direction. And so we're encouraging people, and especially those who may or may not be in the houses of faith around our city, take your words, use your words. And also, I'll give you another tool that people have. There's another tool that you can put in your hand that most of us carry, which is called a cell phone. And when you find yourself in trouble, there are 3 numbers you can dial, 911. Get help to get into that environment, and you don't have to take matters into your own hand and cause violence that has so many other repercussions and that can send your life into a spiral because you've used violence against another person.
Well, speaking of words, let's look at the words of Memphis Mayor Paul Young, who also released a statement a short time ago about today's tragedy. He said, "My heart is more than heavy today as we mourn the tragic loss of Pastor Ricky Floyd to senseless gun violence." He went on to say that Pastor Floyd was a beloved leader, friend, mentor, and servant to our city. He dedicated his life to lifting up others and guiding countless souls with his wisdom. What do you think of the tone that the mayor set with those words?
I think it's responsible. And I think it's considerate. And so what I would hope that the mayor would be doing is amplifying and increasing his commitment to the type of policies that would mitigate these types of things from happening. As we've said countless times, even in our conversation already, it just happens far too often. And so I'm appreciative of any public figure who will offer up their condolences to another public figure in times of tragedy. I think where the rubber meets the road is when we are able and willing and ready to leverage our political platform, our pastoral platform, our community platform to ensure that we're working towards a response to this particular incident, but moreover, a response to what we are calling the public health crisis of gun violence in the first place.
And it's not just gun violence. You may or may not know that Pastor Floyd was the victim of a Memphis crime. While he was dedicated to helping people who caught up in crime, he was a victim of crime himself. In fact, in 2023, when the city was plagued with a car crime crisis, we all know somebody whose car was broken into. Someone broke into Floyd's car. And despite the setback, Floyd told us he was focused on helping people get out of a life of crime. And he went on to say his cars were broken into multiple times, but the problem was part of a much bigger issue. Let's listen.
I'm in downtown Memphis now in the gated community. I've been here about 11 years, and I've probably had more break-ins in my cars in 1 year than I did 11 years in the Raleigh-Frazier area. But we've got to put some healthy measures in place to bring healing to our community.
As we mentioned, Floyd was the president of the Husband Institute. It's a boys' mentoring program which aimed at helping boys between the ages of 6 and 17 become leaders in the community and as well as at home. And that was his life mission, guys. I mean, he really, really believed in that, and I can't tell you how many times he appeared on our newscasts talking about that very thing.
Well, there are those of us in this community, the clergy community, and when I say that, that we have a great respect for those who do the work. Many of us are well-trained orators, and we know how to use the gift of rhetoric and communication to preach, but it's after the preaching where it really matters. This is where the rubber meets the road. When do you get out in this community and roll up your sleeves and inspire people to do the work to make the systemic changes that need to be made? Ricky was that guy, and Ricky could be found with his sleeves rolled up. He could be found doing the work. He could be found, I mean, and let's be honest, I don't know that we know of Ricky as a great pulpitarian. We know him as a great community leader, a great servant leader. And so that matters to those who are in this space because we see a lot of great orators. I mean, I know a lot of people who can exemplify and try to duplicate the gifts of the Spirit, but it's the fruit that shows whether or not anything is really growing from what you're doing.
Earlier, Dr. Norman mentioned the enterprising nature of Pastor Floyd. You know, he started this thrift store right across from his church. I got a couple suits from there, and I used to tease him and tell him I looked better than him in his own stuff. But I think even that initiative where he was using that as an employment opportunity to try to get people to stop recidivism. You know, that's another way that he was connecting the work that needs to be done outside of the church with the things that he would be espousing from the pulpit while in the church. So again, this is a loss. He is a unique brother, and he and I had several spirited conversations over the years, and I'm sure that's the case for a lot of the faith leaders. But one thing that was sure was he was sincere about trying to do something to positively impact the community. And he's not, people like that are not easily replaced. And so there's some broken pieces that's going to have to be picked up over the next
Can I give you a funny story about that?
Love to.
The thrift store. Okay, so not only was he the greatest enterprising visionary for the thrift store, he was also the greatest salesperson for the thrift store. So he would tell me all the time, he says, "Hey, Norm, that's a nice jacket you got on. Man, that really looks good." And he said, "I tell you what I need you to do. You're a big guy, and I got some kids who need that, so I need you to give it to the thrift store." I mean, literally, he inspired me to the point that when I would purchase something, I have this kind of idea that I don't need this anymore, one-to-one replacement, or don't hold on to stuff. Yeah, get rid of it. So I'm a bigger person, and so I get those sizes, and I would give them to his thrift store, and then I would make him come and pick them up. I said, "Now, if I got to give them to you, you're going to come and pick it up."
I got suits in my church office right now. No. Suits that he was supposed to come pick up.
And
I teased him about never coming to pick up.
Another funny story, since we're talking, and that's why we got to have both sides of this guy.
There's a thrift store right now.
That's it. Another funny story, though, back to what you said earlier about that car break-in piece. So we were at a breakfast one time, and this was shortly after, not just the car break-in, but he was carjacked at one point. And so after we prayed through that and saw that it was something that he could get through, he talked to me about it, and then he said, "Man, this is going on. I got carjacked, and then they broke in my car." Then the next time he saw me, he talked about it again. And so my joke with him was, "You need therapy, man. You need to go somewhere and talk to somebody about this because, you know, it keeps happening to you, and you need to make sure you're okay." And so he would look at me sometimes, and I would call him sometimes. He said, "Don't call me with that stuff again." He was a really wonderful, spirited guy, man. We're going to miss that guy for the work that he did, but for the person of who he is.
And based on just what we've talked about here today, you know, he had so many reasons to give up, throw up his hands and say, "You know what, I'm done. I've been a victim of crime too many times, and I give up," and yet he kept pressing on. And I think there's something special about faith leaders like him, and you too as well. There are very few, in a city that has a church on every corner, there are very few who really stand out and give not just back to their congregations and their flock, but to the city as a whole. And I just wonder, what is the motivation there that you see? Is it a calling that you feel like you want to give back in even more of a way than most pastors would?
I think that's always part of it. I think all of us have a sense of call and vocation. but that's also connected to personal experience.
Exactly.
And so anybody who knows his story, and he would tell it all the time.
Yep.
You know, if he was giving a graduation speech, if he was giving a eulogy for somebody, you know, he would always tell, you know, his backstory. And so when you have been brought through circumstances and situations and trials and tribulations and have overcome and conquered as he had, he would call himself someone who has been transformed and healed, and he wanted that same transformation and healing for other people.
Well, you made a wonderful compliment to the three of us. You said there was something special. We know that there's something special about Ricky, and I don't know if there's yet anything special to be discovered about me. I'm sure there's nothing special about Earle. No, I'm just kidding. But that's the.
Come on, brother.
We have to have these. We have to have these moments,
right?
Because while we're so busy, sometimes we wake up to these tragedies,
right?
And then one among us is no longer among us. You know, the circle is broken, and so I jab at him like that because
we jab all the time like that. When I walked in,
right?
Yes.
I know.
Exactly.
I wish we had.
But we also said this.
Yeah.
We've been in these situations far too many times.
Far too many times.
You know, we've walked down the aisles of funerals of colleagues, community leaders, and friends far too many times, and especially when the circumstances are as tragic as this.
Yeah.
So as lighthearted as we want to make it,
right.
because of how deep the grief is, and not just for us individually, but the grief for the entire community, we want to make sure we create space to grieve.
There are pastors all over the city right now, man, who are just shocked and stunned, grieving. They had interaction with Ricky yesterday at the Fraser community meeting that was going on, which he was always going to be present. So they're grieving and stunned right now. And then, can I just honestly say it, we feel a sense of vulnerability sometimes.
Sure.
You know, the truth of it is you know where we are most of the time on Sunday morning and Wednesday night, okay? We are somewhere trying to bring hope to others and work in those spaces, and then something like this tragically happens to an Artura in her driveway, to Ricky, regardless of where it happens. And so these things are happening. And so that sense of vulnerability and loss among a small community of people, you can say that there's a church on every corner, but I can guarantee you there's not a pastor at every church. I can tell you that there are some people who are hirelings. The scripture calls it that. So for those of us who are entrenched in loving the community, this place called Memphis, the people who do what the book of Jeremiah say, pray for the place in which I have caused you to dwell. You're there on assignment and there on a purpose. And although all of our purposes don't mimic each other and mirror one another's, we know what they are, and we're committed to getting them done against all odds.
He reached out to me Monday via text, inviting me to a meeting that's coming up next week with the district attorney and the chief of police and others, and I was unable to commit to it, but those were the things that he would be found doing, not just trying to be a maverick and a Lone Ranger, although he had some of those tendencies because he was just that kind of unique person, but he was also trying to make sure that the people who he felt like needed to be in the room were in the room.
Strategic is another word we can use to describe him, because he knew who to invite to the table, and so his voice was not overused. He would also plant and tell you, now I need you to talk about this, right? I remember a club meeting once where he had been involved and he was trying to push for certain things, and so the people in the room who were pushing back came in with the idea, we're going to shoot down what what Pastor Floyd is going to say. Problem is, he had given the narrative to other people in the room, and for us to echo the message. And so we came in finding ourselves as passionate about it as he would be. And so people were kind of going, uh-oh, we don't know how to shoot this down. And he was just sitting back with his hands folded like this, as he would often do sometimes, kind of going, I didn't say it, they did, right?
But he was the conductor.
He was strategic.
There was
he knew how to fight in tandem.
Yeah, we fought over strategy a lot, he and I.
Pastor Floyd also worked to increase the number of homeowners in Fraser. That was a big cause of his. He started a program that educated and facilitated the purchasing of homes. The program was vital for people who never thought that would be possible for them. The program not only taught people how to buy a home, but also more importantly, how to keep a home, which we all know can be a challenge. The church also purchased homes with the goal of selling them to people who completed the program.
We want people to begin to form a habit of paying on time, being responsible, and at the same time, while they're developing that habit of paying on time, we want to begin to perfect their credit scores. We want to begin to show them how to save.
And that really spoke to me, guys, because, again, he just seemed to have a knack for really getting to the root of some of the problems facing this community. And then he took action to make it happen. And we all know that we live in a town that's majority renters. Very proportionally small number of people own homes here, and he was determined to put a dent in that. And if it was that problem, if it was youth violence, if it was the thrift store, he took action.
He basically was saying to people in Fraser, a community that's often overlooked, like some of the places that we serve in Binghamton and sometimes even in Whitehaven where Earle is, that you too deserve to be a part of what we've called the American dream, and you're entitled to it. So let me help leverage that and bring it within access and within reach, but also educate you to know how to participate in it so that nobody can change your dream into a nightmare. But let me say something else. For the congregants who lended themselves to that vision and mission, hats off to them, because it doesn't happen by the hands of just one person. So in order to be out and to be able to go out and buy homes, that meant there were people who were there who said, we'll give so that we can buy homes and that we can leverage this dream and make it accessible to people who we may not even know. That says a lot about the people at that particular church and in churches all around this city that do great work. The African American church, such a philanthropic part of what makes this city work and often overlooked, and Pursuit of God was a major part of that, as well as so many other churches. So
he didn't, thrust himself onto the scene doing those types of initiatives. He evolved and matured into that. He and I had, as I said earlier, some spirited conversations about a lot of these ideas, and I've actually seen him shift his perspective.
He was open-minded enough to say.
I mean, he was strong-willed, but definitely amenable. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to be a pastor and not have a strong will, especially any amount of tenure. But what I want to amplify is that he was willing to publicly repent when he felt as though he had wronged someone and it was acknowledged that it was wrong. He was not so strong-willed that he could not say, hey, I'm sorry, I apologize, and he even did it publicly, and I don't think enough pastors do that. Norman has never apologized to anybody about anything, no matter how wrong he was, but I still forgive him and think he's all right.
I've apologized to all of them. I just haven't apologized to you.
On a more serious note, what would be your message to that congregation that is dealing with this grief right now and knowing that they've lost their beloved pastor who inspired them, as you talked about, to do many things to help others? What would be your message to them today?
Hold on to that inspiration that he received from God and imparted unto them. Don't lose that hope. Keep that vision, keep that mind, and realize that they have a sustainable mission in their hands right now, that they must continue the work that the Lord gave to Pastor Ricky Floyd, the vision that he gave to him, and continue the work for the very work's sake, that they must continue that particular pathway.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen or heard the last from Pastor Floyd.
No.
His work is going to live on, and I would encourage that congregation to embrace his vision as a church without walls, because they got a congregation that is going to surround them throughout the community and throughout the country.
Well, if you guys know him at all, and I only had the pleasure of meeting him twice, you know that the congregants were very inspired by him, and I think they will take your message to heart, for sure. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. Before we go, we want to remind you, if you're just joining us, that Memphis police responded to a Mama's Bar and Kitchen on Kentucky Avenue just before 1:30 this morning. When officers got there, they found Pastor Floyd dead. Investigators say that the shooting followed a verbal argument between Floyd and 42-year-old Samantha Marion. She is now charged with voluntary manslaughter. No bond or court date has been set for her at this time. There you see her mugshot. And we will be continuing to follow developments with this story as the evening and week progress, and keep you posted on what we learn not only here on ABC 24+, but also online and on ABC 24. So thank you so much again to our pastors here for coming in, shedding some light and some perspective on this amazing guy. He's certainly going to be missed, and Memphis just won't be the same without him. That's for sure.
Thank you.
Make sure you also download the ABC 24 app. It's free, and you can download it from the App Store or Google Play, or you can text the word app to 901-321-7520. Thanks for joining us for this special coverage. I'm Richard Ransom.